the site in its totality is about 1,800 acres, and it sits almost at a midpoint along the M20 between Ashford, about 7-8 miles to the west, and Folkestone a little closer to the east. So at the north, or the top side of the slide there, just above the red line, you'll see the M20 motorway running across the top, and in the northeast corner, junction 11, which provides good access to the site. Just to the south of the motorway, of course, there's the all-important railway, which runs along the northern boundary of the site, with the Western Hangar Station located just about there. The red line doesn't indicate the entire master plan area for the site. That actually extends beyond the red line to the southwest corner. Julia will indicate there, takes in Link Park, which I'm sure you're aware of, and part of the Aspinall land to the west. The red line delineates the planning application boundary. I'll say a bit more about that later, but that represents the first 8,500 houses, the entire master plan. We're anticipating 10,000 homes. In terms of how the project got started, it began with what didn't seem at the time like a modest investment, but in terms of what's happened since, probably does. The council acquired about 350 acres of land in the sort of central to southwest part of the site. It did that. It bought I think 6 separate parcels on a big sort of blind tender basis, and its reason for doing that was to invest a commercial opportunity on behalf of the council, looking forward to the sort of medium to long term. So at that point in history, we didn't have any immediate aspirations to develop the land, but it seemed to be, when the opportunity came up, something too good to miss, because we felt that at some point in the future, this area of land would be right for development. So we acquired the land, and we let it to a tenant farmer, which covered our borrowing. And then, to our surprise, really, and not many of our local people sort of believe us, but this will happen in November 2015. 2 months later, the government announced its Garden Towns programme, and invited bidders to submit ideas for where new garden towns could be brought forward. The council decided that it would put a proposal together, which it did, and it submitted something to government in the following months. Now, it was pretty clear at the time that the 300 odd acres that we'd bought was insufficient to create a new town, and so we moved into discussions with a company called Cozumel Estates, which was owned by the Reuben brothers, and they'd about 8 years previously acquired Folkestone Racecourse, and had made public their aspirations to develop that land at some point. It actually failed at one of the local plan inquiries. We did a deal with Cozumel based on equalisation principles, where we essentially said that we would jointly fund the project, that we'd try and acquire the necessary land jointly to enable us to build at the right sort of level, the right capacity. And that meant that the council then got into further arrangements to acquire land to the south of the A20, and broadly speaking, Cozumel took on the land to the north. So we agreed to assemble land to submit planning and application jointly, and then ultimately to work towards a joint venture arrangement where we would deliver the site together. The plan that you see in front of you represents two designations. One is land that's controlled by the project in terms of its it's freehold, which is the dark green, and further areas of land where it holds an option to acquire the land. The one exception is the solid area to the southeast of the site, which was latterly acquired by Homes England. So they've got about an 8% stake in the overall site. So in terms of land ownership, we're in a pretty enviable position, I think, in that we control pretty much the 95% of the site, and we're confident that we can't be held to ransom by anyone. And that's important because on many sites of this size, one of the key problems in moving towards delivery has been trying to get a whole range of landowners to work and cooperate together, and many projects have stalled for that reason. So we're in a good position from a land perspective. Should you move to the next slide, Julia? Brilliant. Okay. So the council has taken some pretty chunky decisions over recent months. We've got good political support for the project, and in November 2019, the council committed £100 million towards the project, which was something completely beyond anything the council's ever sort of done before. I think for many it felt like quite a brave step. That £100 million was seen to do a number of things. One, it was to complete land assembly, and particularly, as some of you are probably aware, about £25 million of that went towards acquiring the Cozumel interest. So we moved from moving towards a joint venture to moving to undertake the whole of the development ourselves. And what I mean by that is to complete the assembly of the land, to complete the planning process, and then to deliver infrastructure with a view to selling on serviced plots. That's kind of how it works as a basic business model. The Cabinet more recently agreed to create the Otterpool Park LP, which is intended to be the delivery vehicle that actually makes all those other things happen. So it's currently being staffed by 5 people from the local authority, but we'll appoint more people to it to enable us to move forward. And we're very conscious that there are skills that we simply don't have, that we need to make that happen, particularly around the delivery of infrastructure and construction. I should have mentioned that's one of our other acquisitions. You referred to it earlier, Ray. I think Western Hanger Castle was acquired as part of the site, which caused a bit of a stir locally. That was 2.9 million. Our reason for investing in it was that we thought it would be quite valuable in adding interest to the placemaking within the site. And I think Julia might say a little bit more about that in a moment. Okay, should we move on?
I was just going to say, Andy, that I've opened up the chat button, so if anyone's got any questions, you can just make a note in there, then I'll cover them off later.
Sure, that's good.
Thanks.
I'm quite happy to take interruptions, Ray, if people prefer that. Quite relaxed around that. If anyone feels they've got a burning desire to ask a question, or we can wait to the end. Leave that with you.
Yeah, that's fine. Yeah, no problems.
In one of the biggest struggles that we've had and are still enjoying, I think, is really trying to define exactly what the settlement's going to be. We've got a regard almost as a baseline, which is a charter that the council laid down in early days, which is actually quite comprehensive in setting some guidelines for us in all sorts of areas, in terms of what they would hope that we would achieve. So anything from water to supply, utilities, number of homes, mix of homes, type of employment, biodiversity, and so on and so forth. So that's something that we sort of aspire towards. But within the company context, one of the critical things for us is also the need to remain commercial, and that's something that we were very conscious of when we were working with our partner Cozumel, and something that is at the forefront of our thinking at the moment. So there's this constant um, tension, I suppose, between trying to deliver everything that the council would like to provide for local people, and ensuring that the project works commercially in order to fund everything. We've done some work towards the vision in developing a brand. So we're focusing on 3 C's there. Things that we think provide a bit of that together provide a unique selling point for the site, for the town. Connectivity is important in a range of different ways. You'll see from the location that we're well connected to London, particularly by train and the HS1. We also got good connections to the continent via Eurotunnel. We've got local connections through public transport, but also through the motorway being right on our doorstep. So all that is important to us. The location, we think, helps to set us aside from certainly other major settlements within Kent, and I suppose particularly Ebbsfleet. The environments that we sit within, we think clearly are very, very different, and we think works to our advantage. So we've got an area of outstanding natural beauty on 3 flanks. We sort of sit between it, so the outlook is great. The potential for people to go out and enjoy the landscape is really important to us. And the 3rd C is creativity, and that's really a key focus for us in terms of future jobs. So it's a sector that we're interested in, that and sort of digital industries, and really following on the success that the Creative Foundation have sort of developed in Folkestone in past years. And we're working very closely with them to see how the 2 things can align and work for each other. So it's creative.
Daniel's raised a hand. Just I thought I'd look, because in case you're not getting the signal.
Thank you. Just on the branding front, Andy, with getting Otterpool ready for when it comes to marketing on the 3 C's, was it felt that the coastal element of it was not, because it's 10 minutes away from the coast, was not one that should be marketed or pushed, or not necessary? Is it felt too far away?
It's a really good question. We don't think it's too far away, and at one point we were toying with connected coast and creative. So we had a really major debate whether it should be countryside and coast or countryside. And I think what we were conscious of really was in most of our material, we will very much present come and live by the sea, because we think that's terribly important. I suppose what we were trying to avoid was a criticism that we're not actually on the coast. And so we didn't want to be accused of misrepresenting things in any way. But at the same time, we recognise its value, and yeah, we're certainly going to push it all we can.
Great.
Creativity as well, I think just worth mentioning, we're looking at ways of how we can explore that beyond sort of the obvious direct sort of employment links. And we want to bring the opportunity for people to move into the area to develop things in a creative way. And I suppose that the range of examples of that, but one thing we'll be pressing is self-build homes, where we're hoping that people will have the opportunity to develop something that they really want, rather than relying entirely on sort of major house builders and so on. So but we're working on developing creativity throughout the project. Just a few key targets to bear in mind. I mentioned 10,000 homes. That gives you an indication of scale. That's across 1,800 acres. We have a target of 9,000 jobs, which we recognise in achieving. That's one of our key targets and challenges. We expect the development will be over approximately a 30-year delivery programme, though that is largely dependent on how popular it proves to be as a site, and what sort of what we call the absorption rate, the number of homes that are likely to be built and sold throughout each year. And you'll see there we're aiming at a pretty high target, 350 to 500 dwellings per year. Just to give you a feel for what that means, I think within Shepway district, it's I think probably only about one occasion have they exceeded 400 homes a year. So it's a very high target. Within the scheme itself, Julie will say more about this, but we've set ourselves a target of 50% for green space. So that sits quite neatly with the garden town sort of philosophy. And start on site of 2022, all being well. I'm going to go through this very quickly because I think what Julia's got to say is quite interesting actually. But just to say we're dealing with various planning processes at the moment. We've got representations to support the core strategy local plan, which provides for this allocation. That moves towards hearings, we hope, in October this year, and we would hope that plan gets adopted early in the new year. Running in parallel with that is a planning application that we submitted about 18 months ago, and we're hoping that we will be finalising responses to the local planning authority in November this year, with expectation that gets approved either sort of spring to summertime next year. And in parallel to that, we're moving towards the sort of the more detailed proposals through a detailed examination and master planning process for the phase one, the first 1,500 homes within the site. Okay. Yeah, that sets out a very broad programme. So I'll say planning permission early next year with a little bit of luck. Then we moved into the detailed phase one planning, which takes us through to 2021. And we hope within that year to be getting into some of the site enabling works, but there's a fair bit to be done to make that happen. To cut a long story short, we hope that housing will be underway in 2023, with the first occupation towards the end of 2023. Okay. Now I hand over to Julia to get into much more detail around what it's actually going to look like. Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Right, well, starting off really with the master plan, and I know many of you will be familiar with the master plan. This is what was submitted with the planning application last year, and I know several of you were involved in discussions prior to this in various forums around as we were developing the master plan. So I won't spend too much time on this, but perhaps focus on some of the work that's happened since then. But just to mention that it's effectively we're talking about this is the master plan for 8,500 homes, with a town centre located roughly here, close to the railway station, good access to the motorway, and also close to the castle and the racecourse lake, which I'll touch a bit more on later, with other neighbourhoods based around neighbourhood centres around the rest of the site. So that's broadly speaking the master plan. In terms of the work that's happened in recent times, I think the landscape-led approach to the master plan is something that we've worked from right from the start, and that's been developed over the course of time. So within the planning application and work that's happening to date, we've got 3 big strategic parks, which will be the park next to the castle here, the countryside park, which will be a much more naturalistic sort of environment. I think we very much see the castle park as a town park, so more formal place, space for playing informal games. There'll be a cricket pitch, etc. The country park will be a much more kind of informal piece of countryside, really, much wilder in character. And then we've got the riverside park, which runs along here, which will provide a corridor. And there's further the work being undertaken at the moment. Oh, I should probably mention the other important spaces, because again, this was an important factor that came out of conversations with the existing communities, was including a kind of a green space adjacent to the existing villages of Lymm and Barrow Hill, and indeed Weston Hanger, to provide them with a kind of, to allow them to retain their identity and character. We're working on a green infrastructure strategy at the moment, which sets out this kind of landscape infrastructure in more detail, and the character of that, and the whole idea of being able to walk from your doorstep with very accessible green space on your doorstep. As Andy's mentioned, we're aiming for 50% of this town to be green space. And another sort of positive feature in relation to landscape is ecology. We at the moment, it looks like we're able to provide 120% biodiversity net gain, which means a 20% increase on the natural habitats and environment for native species, which above the existing on the site. The other thing that we're working on, just looking at these green links here, is improving the existing foot and cycle network outside of the site, so links down to Hythe and elsewhere and up to the AONB, just to ensure that people really can access the countryside easily. And landscape's very much part of that, really important vision that we talked about, hence appearing in the 3 Cs that Andy mentioned. Another one that doesn't quite feature in the 3 Cs, but it is equally important, is around heritage. And again, we probably know a lot more about the site than we did initially. I mean, there's the obvious heritage assets like Westenhanger Castle, which Andy's mentioned, and that's a really important asset to bringing character to the whole place. But we've got more recent features to consider, such as the airfield at Lymm, which in its military and civic use until relatively recent times, and indeed the racecourse itself. So we've got everything from the very historic Bronze Age barrows through to the airfield, and we're intending to develop a heritage trail that will very much kind of tie in with the cultural and creative work that we're going to be doing as well. Something that might be of interest to Jason, it's quite interesting that one of the kind of challenges and opportunities really around planning for Otterpool Park is around that longer term horizon. How do you plan for something 30 years hence? And I think transport's a really good illustration of that, that when we started planning this site 3 years ago, effectively what we started with was an intention to create a sustainable environment as possible, to create walkable neighbourhoods, to ensure that children could walk to school, to have good cycling links, etc. But there was still a very much a kind of traditional approach to transport planning, in the sense it was all focused on counting number of vehicle trips and projecting those forward. And even in the 3 years since we started work on this, the world has changed, and we're actually working now with WSP consultants to focus more on mobility for the future. And really, if we're going to create a sustainable transport environment here, how can we make a real shift in thinking to move people to and to think about people's sort of how people want to live, perhaps more than simply crudely car journeys. And I think this, the last few months has really demonstrated that what's really important to people is access to local facilities, walkable communities, less use of the car. And I think all of that plays to our strengths, in addition to the fact we've got a station on site. So the work that WSP are doing with us, we hope will bring a real kind of shift in thinking towards really aiming to be sustainable in terms of transport. And also that does have an impact on the detailed design of streets and spaces, to make them more pedestrian friendly, to really create attractive environments that make people want to stay within Otterpool Park. We will still be investing in the road network, that's unavoidable, and it's quite right that we do, particularly where there are existing issues, but I think it's where you put your priorities, and ensuring that investment in things like buses, improving the railway station, and street design all feature alongside thinking about investment in the road network. I've included water just because it's something that tends to have been one of the trickiest issues to resolve, and also one that's been high on people's level of interest, really. This image illustrates the drainage the proposed drainage patterns on site. There is a small part of the site which is in the floodplain along the river corridor, as you would expect here. So we're designing the scheme to provide a kind of buffer around that, that floodplain. But one of the challenges is that we can't increase the water outfall into the River Stour. So that's required some quite careful thinking about drainage within the site and how we manage our own drainage. And so this diagram gives an illustration of how that's going to work, broadly speaking, and how we can use water most constructively to our advantage, actually, as a placemaking feature, actually creating spaces involving water where you can have housing fronting onto them, using the existing lake at the racecourse, for example. So there's lots of creative ways that we can make use of that drainage strategy in terms of the design. The other aspect of water that's has been a challenge is the wastewater treatments. In terms of water supply, we've got Affinity Water have been really clear about what needs to be done, and we can provide for water for the site. There's a fairly clear plan for that. The wastewater treatment is a slightly more pressing issue, as there's very little capacity in the existing system. So we've got a couple of options potentially for dealing with that. We've been working with Southern Water about a solution involving the existing Sellinge works, which is very close to the site, just up to the northwest, and also in parallel looking at the potential for an on-site treatment works where we would deal with all our own wastewater treatment somewhere in this location. So there's a couple of options being considered there. As far as housing goes, we've got a housing strategy which is being drafted at the moment, which sets out in more detail what we're trying to achieve. But just a couple of things to mention on that. As part of that work, we actually did a very local housing needs assessment just within the neighbouring communities of Stanford, Lymm, Sellinge, Aldington, just to understand what the very local housing needs are across all ages. So that was kind of, if you can imagine a sort of hierarchy, starting with the very local. Consultants Quad have then looked at all of the other types of housing need, including the people who are going to be working here, what types of housing are they going to need. The obvious affordable housing within the district, we will be providing 22% affordable housing to meet with that local need and people on the existing housing list. But we'll also bearing in mind that what we want to do here is create a balanced community. We don't want to be meeting the needs of just one age group or one sector. We want to provide accommodation for young people, families, older generations. So we're very conscious of ensuring we've got that sort of mix, and that we do attract some people of working age to the area and raise the quality of the jobs here. And Andy's mentioned about the opportunities around self-build, which is terribly important. I think the other thing to say is that because of the council's strong position as master developer, it gives us it's much easier then for us to involve local businesses. So we can ensure that we're working with a range of developers, including small local businesses. Self-build is really good for supporting local construction companies and suppliers. So I think it's because we're very close to this, we can help to work with local businesses, as well as, I mean, inevitably we will be working with volume house builders, but that'll be on our terms and very much ensuring that they're bought into the quality of place that we're trying to create. Around jobs, I think, as you know, we've always said that we will be providing around 9,000 jobs, and around half of those will come from jobs created within the community, so in schools, health centres, grounds maintenance, all those sorts of things. But around 50% will be new employment space. And again, that sort of whole question about what's the workplace of the future is very pertinent at the moment. And I think we very much see, in addition to space for perhaps more traditional businesses, we know there are some businesses locally, for example, who may be interested in expansion and moving here. The trend towards perhaps more flexible working, innovation centre, smaller office space, ability to work at home. All of those things are things that we're really taking into account, alongside the really important connection to London. And I think, you know, the balance may have shifted, and perhaps we'll be seeing more people commuting out from London to come and you know, take up space here due to things like, well, for financial reasons, apart from anything else. But there will still be a connection to London, and that link up to St Pancras is still important, and the ability to perhaps have businesses working between here and there is important. I think one thing I was going to mention is that in our new company, the LLP, we had our first board meeting fairly recently, and you'll know Luke Quilter, who has now been appointed as the chair of the board. And I think that's really exciting because it brings firstly a local connection, but secondly insight into digital industries and some of those sorts of businesses that and how what their needs might be and how they could be encouraged to come into the district. I won't say too much about the community facilities, but needless to say, we've got to create quite a plan to make sure that facilities such as the schools, health centre, etc., are all in place, a community space, etc. And again, there's conversations happening with the CCG around what the future of medical care is, and again, that's changing rapidly. I just wanted to mention about now work that we're focusing on around phase 1 of the master plan area, which is this area of the site just here. We've got a company called Tibbles who are now looking in more detail at this particular location, and because this includes the town centre, we felt it was really important that we get this right in terms of putting a marker down for the quality of the place we're creating a really strong town centre. So they've started work on that. It's really one of the initial bits of when they were doing their research into, you know, successful and thriving town centres. One of the messages that they've had back quite strongly is that the town centres in the future, as we all know, are not going to be retail based, but the ones which tend to do better are ones which actually have an attractive environment that people want to come to. So what can you do to create a sort of a USP? And I think we've got all the selling points here because we do have a really lovely lake at the racecourse. We've got a new park and the castle just up here to the west. So we've got the makings of a really strong identity for the town centre. And so the intention is to maximise the opportunity to relate to those things, to create views across to the castle, to create public space that's well connected to the station up to the north, but is also quite close to the A20, so it's visible, so shops and businesses can actually have a bit of visibility. And we're in discussions with food store providers about ensuring that we can get some sort of shop in early to provide people with something somewhere local to shop. So this is a very early stage piece of work at the moment, which we can come back to on a future date. But it's exciting to be getting into that level of detail. And I mentioned about the use of water. The town centre is a great opportunity to really think about how we can use water to create an attractive public space. And associated with that, just very quickly to mention, sorry, I think I've lost the slide here. We've been doing some work around the park. Again, we're very keen that we can open the castle park, or at least part of it, early on, both for new residents as they arrive, but also because commercially it's very attractive to have a green space that's accessible and well designed next to new housing. And I think very importantly as well, it's a facility for existing residents so that people living locally can have got something sort of benefits, as it were, to all the development that's happening around them. So there's some emerging work that Mark Hanton, the landscape architect, is doing for us around that. I think I'm sort of missing, I've managed to delete one of my own slides here, but the other thing I was going to mention was around the castle. Again, we've been doing some further work around the future use of the castle, which I think is, which will be really helpful for us as a company. to ensure that we strike a balance between the commercial opportunities of the castle for redeveloping for hotel use or other commercial use that help it to wash its face financially, but balanced against having public use of the facilities, particularly the barns. And there's a company called Purcell conservation architects who are working with us on that, on how the castle could be developed in future, a kind of short, medium and long-term plan, so that there's some actions that we can take fairly quickly at the castle, for example, to get the to clear the moat and get that filled with water, and then longer term development proposals. So that covers it from me. So really over to questions.
Thanks, Julia, that's great.
I'll stop sharing. And then, there we go.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you for that. Give me a second, just getting myself sorted out. Yeah, that's great. So we don't have anything on chat. So does anyone have any questions? If you want to raise your hand to Daniel, I appreciate Kimberly, Jason, Catherine and Matt. I don't know if you're back, Matt, but you'll have to somehow just take off mute and shout out. But we go for Daniel first.
Yeah. So on the stages that Andy, I think, mentioned originally about how it's going to be phased. So there was the element that's going to happen concurrently with the application of the detailed application. So when we're at that stage of actually looking at the detail, I assume that means details such as actually, you know, the housing, if it's going to be 2-3 bedroom housing, apartments, the architecture, what the types of the layouts and all those other bits and pieces. Will the council be, or whoever's developing, will they be consulting again with the public like they have done up until now, when it actually gets to that fine nitty-gritty stage of deciding on what type of housing and the other facilities are going to actually be built in the initial stages?
Yeah, I think, Julie, you're probably best placed to answer that. I mean, there's currently work going on to prepare a design code, which will sort of provide the first level of detail for that. And Julia sits on that group, so I'll let her describe that a bit better.
Actually, yes, it's a good question, because I should have mentioned the design code. Tybalt, who are working on the phase 1 master plan, are also preparing a strategic design code for the whole site, which will help guide the quality of development. And both that phase 1 master plan and the design code, we will be going out once the work's progressed adequately. I mean, it's fair to say we're slightly delayed, but in the autumn, yes, certainly we'll be taking those out to consultation before they get too far developed. I think one thing Tybalt are really good at is being very engaging in working with people, and they think they understand the importance of involving people before things get too far progressed. And it's the same for each future phase.
Daniel, in terms of our thinking, we're trying to do two things which seem to pull in opposite directions. In the one hand, we're trying to promote self-build, and to a large degree, we don't want to handcuff people there. You know, we want people to be able to express themselves with more freedom than perhaps you would normally get within the planning system. And at the other side, we're conscious that we're going to have to rely to a degree to hit housing targets, to rely on house builders, including some of the larger ones. And I think with them, that's where we're sort of more likely to be tying them down, I suppose, than letting them run away with their imagination. Because I think one of the tests for us is to try and avoid what tends to have happened across most of the country, really. I think where all you end up with is a number of housing estates that are somehow bolted together. That's not what we want here. We want to be achieving high quality of design throughout, really. And therefore the code that Julia's working on will be something not just for the planning authority to use, but something for the company to use to control, I suppose, particularly the volume house builders, to ensure that they deliver something, you know, that's of a better standard than we often see.
Yeah, I think that's what I was getting at. It's the design code that you mentioned, I think, is going to be really important. What came up a lot from a number of different stakeholders at a number of the consultations that I was involved in was that there was really a sort of general consensus or feeling of the look and feel of the housing, the layouts? I mean, you guys mentioned that you'd been and seen other towns in other countries. I can't remember if I think one was in Denmark or Amsterdam. I can't remember where they were. And things like the actual architecture, the design, the color, but also on the eco side. You know, are they going to have solar panels? Are they going to have electric charging stations for cars? Are they going to be, you know, with basements, with shops downstairs, with accommodation above, or upside down houses? All those different things that were mentioned, if they're going to be factored into that design code before lots of money is spent with, as you say, at that detailed stage with the architectural drawings to go ahead with development. It was just to know if, again, we're going to be privy to seeing that design code and some initial designs before it actually does physically go ahead to get built. Yeah, so that's great.
Yeah, I guess there'd be a planning process in that element as well, wouldn't there? You'll have to check and validate before it can be built anyway. So
yes, there will, but we'll also be consulting around the design code itself, I think, and it's that
Brilliant.
to steer things.
okay, great. Well, I've got a question from Jason, if you would, Jason.
Yeah, no, thanks very much, Julia. And it's really encouraging to hear that the community you're trying to plan for and get built is based around the place that you want to see, rather than trying to provide the format of housing and communities that car-driven communities that we're having typically developed over the last 30, 40 years. And at long last, it looks like people are really getting that message now. Government released a document last week. It's part of their overarching planning documents under the web tag guidance. So it's something more that Highways England use, actually acknowledging now that the landscape's shifting quite significantly. There's a number of factors pushing that. But also we're working at Ebbsfleet, where they've produced a sustainable transport strategy. We helped them devise that, where they're seriously significantly pushing down car provisions, particularly for parking, and actually planning car parking provision to be removed in future and then repurposed for public space. I think people now acknowledge that they don't need 3 cars. They can probably do with 1. What they do want is somewhere nice to go and walk and spend some quality time, and to promote their own healthy lifestyle, because that has benefits beyond transport into health and well-being and so on. So I'm greatly encouraged by the approach you've taken to that master plan and the open space, and actually making places that people want to be in to experience, and not just go shopping and so on.
Yeah, I remember in the early stages, Julia, we went out, or certainly Catherine, I think, we went out and visited a few of the townscapes in Kent. And it's commendable how, with this whole plan, how focused you were on all of those elements, even before COVID, obviously, looking at working from home, looking at car spaces and all of that creativity, really. And so I think that's good. And no doubt there might be an element of more pressure to ensure that these open spaces will be there, which I'm sure there will, and easier facilities with connection on, you know, obviously on the internet and stuff like that, to be able to accommodate more people that no doubt want to be in that environment to work from home. Even greater emphasis on that now.
Thank you.
That answers your question.
It's great to have that kind of support, actually, because I'm sure, as you know, Jason, that it's not always a straightforward argument, because there is still a school of thinking that, you know, you need to, particularly among local people who are really worried about traffic, that the solution is to build bigger roads. So I think there's always that kind of tricky tension. So I think what's really helpful, Jason, is that, you know, your work at Ebbsfleet, this starts to become mutually reinforcing. The more places actually sort of make that shift, the more that helps the case for others to do so.
Yeah, I mean, it's quite tough getting the house builders on board to some degree, particularly those dyed-in-the-wool ones, really, who want to provide their customers what they've been providing them over the last 20 years. But I think they're eventually coming on stream now, as customers actually are demanding something else now. They're demanding healthy places. So, so it's greatly encouraging. Members are a different issue. I've noticed that Swale Borough Council have just adopted their new parking standards, and they've gone upwards, and they're asking for 3 spaces per house for 3 and 4 bedroom dwellings, which is just so short-sighted and counterintuitive at the moment. But luckily, government is shouting from the rooftops on things like cycling and walking now and health. So I think people are steadily getting the message.
I mean, it can't happen quick enough from our point of view, I think. I mean, we've actually had quite a struggle with the highway authorities, who are still really, as a base point, sort of looking to the way that they've done things historically. So looking at junctions, looking at increased demand, and forecasting everything forward, and coming up with solutions like new dual carriageways, you know, which we're still battling with, actually, to try and avoid providing those things.
I think that web tag guidance that came out last week is going to help you a lot. We're discussing with Highways England and KCC on a site in Tunbridge Wells at the moment what the effect of that is. I don't think they've realised it's come out yet, so they're going to struggle. But it's basically saying, you know, there's several downsides to traffic growth now, from COVID, Brexit, the Office of Budget Responsibility forecasts that came out very recently. And actually, we don't need to be planning for all this road infrastructure. So if you're asking for government money to underpin your development, your economic assessment will look very different this week from how it looked 2 weeks ago. And it will help your case, I think.
Okay.
Very encouraging.
Andy, I think, can I bring you back to my recollection of the map where Junction 11, where you have the industrial area near the junction? What's that going to comprise? Do we know? I remember we discussed that some time ago, but has it changed, or is it going to be mini units type thing?
I think it is changing, and I think it is constantly changing, actually. I mean, as it's sort of expressed at the moment, it gives the impression, I think, of sort of business park territory that we might have expected 10 years ago or more. And what we're moving much more towards is a mixed-use development throughout the site. I mean, particularly, I think, between railway station and town centre, I think there's going to be a real strength there, and I think that's where we'll be trying to get things moving in the early years. The business park, I suspect in time will not turn out to what it looks like. I mean, at the moment, I think it serves a useful purpose in that there are sort of more traditional industries that are sort of looking to relocate, and we're in discussions with people there that might not sort of sit within a mixed use environment. So it serves a purpose. But no, I think a lot of our thinking, as you sort of suggested earlier, really is sort of pre-COVID, we were already moving towards trying to encourage people away from London, at least London 5 days a week, to sort of work from home or to work in sort of flexible accommodation in Otterpool, where they might need to go up to town once or twice a week, but generally speaking, that they'd be based in and around their homes at Otterpool. Part of, I mean, that's quite an important concept for our town centre. I think Julia said, you know, we're conscious that retailing will have a role to play, but it won't be like the town centres that have been planned in the past. It needs to generate its sort of vitality or its vibrancy from other uses. And I think part of that will be getting smaller businesses, flexible businesses, to operate in and around the town centre site.
Yeah, okay. And I like the idea of the sustainability side. If you try and get the wastewater, you know, so it's all encompassing, all sustainable by way of within the actual development itself, that would be encouraging, but, you know, self-sustaining, so to speak, completely, perhaps. But yeah, great. Okay, I need to have a chat with you about another matter, about an industrial aspect to that area, but to the east of that site, you know, so that might be something we can chat about. But yeah, that's really good. Are there any other questions? I'm conscious of time. We're doing okay, but if there's any others to come through? No, I think that's looking.
I've got a question about energy, if I might.
Jason, yeah,
gone a bit outside my normal remit, but there's a lot of discussion now about sustainable energy sources and so on. And one of the discussions that's coming around this year is about energy storage. So in order to tap into the energy from wind farms and solar and so on, a way of weaning yourself off gas and whatever else power stations is around new technologies like liquid air energy storage and various battery farms and so on. I know you're not going to have any gas connection on this site. I think that's right, isn't it? So you're going to be mostly electric. I mean, do you think there's some prospect there as technology improves that you could actually build some energy storage into your facility here?
Yeah, I mean, I think we recognise that there's a long way to go in terms of our energy strategy. I mean, we are working with one particular company, it's a bit of a pilot, who are intending to do something similar to that. So that will be, and that's largely a housing scheme that will rely on shared sort of battery storage, which will be supported by PV panels across the whole of the roof. And from that electricity, there will be sort of a communal car sharing sort of opportunity as well. So we're piloting that. More generally, we're exploring the scope for moving towards sort of zero carbon, which we think is going to be a massive challenge, and it's something where we put our hands up at the moment. We don't have the expertise to do that, so we're commissioning some work to help us think that through. And that's intended to sort of look across the site and all of its land uses. So it's not focused on simply constructing housing, but it is taking account of transport, biodiversity and other things. So we recognise there's a lot more to do there. We certainly signed up to new technologies. I suppose the biggest challenge for everybody is that things are developing so quickly that you don't know quite what to hang your hat on. But yeah, we're trying to keep ourselves up to speed and well informed so that we can be flexible and adapt to the opportunities as they arise.
Yeah, I mean, I sit on the Kent environmental strategy, and you know, the stuff that's coming through is quite remarkable, and how things are advancing and improving. Ground source heat pumps. I mean, there's all those different elements. So I know you're onto that, so that's good. So it's a good point, Jason. But I think it's encouraging also that, you know, this development will no doubt be cutting edge of that. So you know, that's really quite exciting. So it's good.
We felt like we were taking a big risk when we decided to go gas free, which was a decision that was taken about 3 years ago. And at that time, all the advice we were getting was that house builders will avoid the site if you don't offer up gas. You know how things have moved in the last couple of years, really, where it's heading very swiftly towards the norm, I think.
Bit like the cars, when it buy diesel, but we won't go there. Right, okay. So any other questions? We've got time for one more. No takers. A bit weird doing this without, I know you're used to it, Neil, but you know, keeping an eye on everyone. I'm going cross-eyed, but there we are. So that's great. So appreciate that, and that's a really good overview. Thanks very much, guys, and we'll share those slides and that information. If I can make a suggestion, you know, on the front slide, if you're just able to put the date on it, then we know what we've got, the latest version, and we'll share that with the board of the Kent and Victory, if that's okay. I'll do that. So that'd be good. So if you can ping them over to me whenever you can, but really appreciate it. If you want to hang on, you're welcome to do so. We haven't got too much to cover off really, but one part of the meeting we tend to do is just a quick catch up. If we can not, I don't know, obviously COVID, I know impacts your own business, but if you can do it from a sector perspective, that might be helpful. If there is anything you'd like to share. So should we start, Lee? Lee, are you happy to start? Have you got any update in your sector or anything in particular you want to share?
Yeah, I suppose what I can really talk about is the impact that we've seen perhaps in the resi market, because obviously as a firm we have a big residential conveyancing team, and you know, we did furlough a couple of staff in the early stages of this from our resi team, but now they're all coming back. And in fact, I think they are all back as of this week. So that's an area that's coming back on stream, seeing more demand than there was obviously in the early stages. Also seeing quite a few developments progressing. I mean, I'm dealing with a number of Section 106 agreements that are all coming to fruition. So there are schemes, there are developers out there still taking schemes forward, it seems. Just thinking more sector-wide. On the corporate side, there's still deals going on. Our corporate teams kept busy over the COVID period. So yeah, it's yeah, there was definitely a slump, but now we're seeing things coming back to a bit more normality, I'd say.
Okay, Lee, thanks for that. I normally go ladies first. Kimberly, are you still with us? You're on mute. You there, Kimberly? No. Well, Catherine, you're a lady. I can see you.
I'm just.
I know you wanted to share a couple of bits. You mentioned.
Oh yes, no, I'm not on mute. Yes, yeah. I was just going to tell you a little bit about the discretionary business grant scheme that District Council has been administering on behalf of government. This was a second phase to the original business grants that the government introduced quite early on, specifically for small businesses and the retail, hospitality and leisure sector. And there the grants were allocated automatically based on
Catherine, you've gone on mute again. You were talking and it clicked back on, I'm afraid.
on mute. Oh,
That's
sorry.
it.
Okay, sorry about that. Not quite sure what happened though.
Can you hear me? Because I think it goes off after a while. Can you hear me?
Kimberly, yeah, we can hear you. Yeah, I'll come back to you in a second, Kimberly. That's great.
Okay.
I think it just goes off after a while. It's not us being mad. I think it's the system.
No, that's okay. Yeah, carry on, Catherine, but you have to go back a few sentences. Sorry, Catherine.
Okay. So quite early on, after the government originally brought in their scheme specifically for small businesses and the retail, hospitality and leisure sectors, which were given out automatically based on the rateable value of properties, they then introduced a new discretionary element, and each local authority was given 5% of the original allocation for its own discretionary scheme. And there was some guidance given as to what each local authority should prioritise, and there was some mandatory requirements that we needed to adhere to. But it gave us some flexibility to focus on specific sectors that were deemed to be important to your own local economy. So we decided we would give priority to a number of sectors, and this sort of changed as the scheme went on. But in essence, we ended up also giving grants to the creative sector. So that included, ICT, digital media companies that we recognise are very important in our area. We also gave priority to construction companies, small SME construction companies, training organisations, and also to care homes. We felt that, we wanted to give some priority to those too. So we introduced our scheme, which was allocated about 1.292 million in total. We opened it on the 1st of June and ran it for 3 weeks. In that time, we've had about 190 applications, and so far we've allocated grants to about 141 businesses. So the bulk of the money has now been distributed. Something like 90% of our overall allocation has now gone. We have got some remaining applications that we're reviewing this week, but I think it's likely that once we've got through those, all of our allocation will be used up. So whereas originally when we closed it a couple of weeks ago now, we thought we might have some funds left to reopen it, that's looking very unlikely at this stage. We've roughly allocated it, 3/4 of all the money has gone in grants, the smallest size of grant that we've given, and that was for 5,000. We had 3 levels of grants, 5,000, 10,000 and 25,000. So the bulk of the money has gone to sort of very small businesses. Really it's benefited a whole range of different sectors.
Yeah, so, great. Yeah. That's really good.
Other work that we've been doing, we've been trying to get on with business as normal, in addition to all these additional activities that we've had to introduce as a result of COVID. And I'm very pleased to say that we are progressing very well with our Mountfield Road Industrial Estate business hub. We've now got all the funding for that scheme secured, roughly £2.5–3 million development there, with funding from the council, also from East Kent Spatial Development Company, and also with a grant from the NDA towards it, which we're very pleased about. In addition to that, we've also very pleased to have got through the first stages of the Get Building Fund that the government announced about 3 weeks ago. And we put forward a project to develop out the remainder of Mountfield Road Industrial Estate, putting in the infrastructure there so that we can either sell off the plots once the infrastructure is in place, or to look at ways of bringing those plots forward ourselves. And so far we've been nominated as part of the list from the South East LEP up to government, and we're hopeful that the government sees merit in the project and encourages us to then go for the full amount, which is about another £3.5 million from government. So we're very pleased with that.
Okay, Catherine, thanks for that. Conscious of time, we haven't got too much, but just a few words. So Kimberly, did you want to give us an update of anything in particular, or?
I'll be very brief. Yeah, we're still developing. Everything's going fine. And yeah, we're very happy to council and government, they're supporting. And I think that's brilliant. And that's all I need to say, isn't it?
Yeah, thanks, Kimberly. That's great. And we look forward to the day where we can get back over to your lovely boardroom and the best croissants in Kent.
Anytime, we're open. We're open for business.
Apart from Daniel's, of course. So we come round to, let's see, sorry, Mike. You're on mute, Mike. Yeah.
There you go.
And then Jonathan.
Yeah, no, it's been, yes, as you can imagine, I'm sure it's been a pretty manic few months. Yeah, creating products with about 3 or 4 days notice, changing eligibility criteria, changing numbers from the government, all sorts. I think the bounce back loan, for example, I think we were ready to go on the Friday before they announced it, and we found a 25k limit, and we found out at the same time as everyone else with Rishi Sunak's announcement that it was actually going to be set at 50k. So, you know, things like that we've had to work with. But yeah, all in all, we've lent, so in this area, I've kind of tried to break it out. So about £9 million in civils and just short of £21 million in bounce back loans. So take that, so that £21 million, for example, that's about 30 years worth of sub 50k lending that we've done in the last, 7 weeks, 8 weeks. And the civils, that's probably, that's about 12 months worth of lending that, again, we've done in the last couple of months. So yeah, hell of a lot going on. And yeah, we've got businesses that are clearly thriving and businesses that are struggling. So taking out those loans for various different reasons and all sorts of other reasons. But I think they're predicting 40 to 50% impairment for the bounce back loans. So I guess we'll watch that space. Watch that space in 12 months' time. So yeah, that'll be interesting when that comes around.
Okay, Mike.
Yeah,
good.
Short and sweet, but happy to take any questions or any thoughts.
Yeah, appreciate that. That's fine. Jonathan, you're on mute.
Yeah, so there's been quite a few announcements for the government with regards to apprenticeship, traineeships and bits like that, but unfortunately there wasn't a lot of detail. That detail is now starting to come through. So what we're doing as a group is putting together all that information into a package, which we're going to start sending out to network and stakeholders next week. So if Ray, if you're okay with that, we'll forward that through yourself. And it's just really how skills, retraining adults, apprenticeships, and all the incentives can help sort of small businesses going forward. So hopefully taking that sort of government jargon out and helping businesses understand how can access some of this funding and retraining.
Yeah, brilliant. Thanks for that, Jonathan. And Matt, you're nice to see you back. You're right. You're on mute. That's it.
I mean, I gave a brief fly through of the position for our own business, which affects all of us across the area. I did just want to say something very briefly about the coach sector. So we're dealing with buses. We're taking people to the shops, kids to school, people to work, all that kind of thing. The coach sector doesn't get any financial support from the government at the moment, unlike the bus sector. And there have been a number of high-profile casualties. Shearing's Group, which include the National Holidays brand, ceased trading quite early on in the pandemic. If I was a betting man, a number of other big names and smaller names are going to follow suit pretty quickly. There are a number of hotels in across the area that thrive on coach bookings. Clearly, people aren't travelling by coach at the moment, and it's very difficult to see how that part of the industry is going to come back. So that's one really to flag up. There's still discussions going on with DFT over trying to come up with what is actually quite a modest funding package when you compare the funding given to the railways at the moment in particular. So I just really wanted to flag that up as a significant issue for the tourism market in particular at the moment, as everyone's struggling to come back from this.
Okay, thanks for that, Matt. And Jason, you okay?
Yeah, thanks, Ray. Yeah, I mean, it's been reasonably business as usual, I think, for our organisation. Planning process has kept moving on, as Lee has alluded to there. Still Section 106 agreements being signed up, still clients seeking planning permission, and to some degree, you're seeing a number of applicants wanting to reshape their planning to react to what's happened over the last 6 months. So yeah, that said, I still think there is the downsides that we're all worrying about. So number of clients are being a bit more cautious, but in general, I think we're trying to just get our heads around what these events are going to do to transport. So that's across all modes. So Matt's spoken at length about how that affects buses, trains, and so on. And the planning system needs to react to that as well. So happy that the government is doing so.
Yeah. Okay, Jason. And Daniel, I think, sorry, Daniel, I think you're last but not least. Yeah.
Yeah, our sector, as everybody knows, has taken a battering. The hospitality in general has been one of the ones that has suffered the most, and which is why the government, to be fair, there has been a lot of lobbying behind the scenes, and the government has listened in many areas. There have been, like I think in every industry, there have been some winners and losers. Restaurants, or those that could adapt to doing takeaways, collections during the lockdown, a lot of them have been able to survive. The furlough, of course, has helped in many ways, but there has been, despite a lot of the financial support that has come to many of the small businesses, which Catherine touched upon, there have been still a lot of larger hotels, which are over, or even pubs and restaurants over that 51,000 rateable value, that have suffered and haven't had any financial support whatsoever, and had to resort to Sybil's loans, as Mike has touched upon, which ultimately means increasing your debt. And then you've got huge pressure come 12 months when you have to pay it back over a short period. It's 5 years after that to pay it back. So we were one of those companies. Our hotels are in that category. We had to take a Sybil's loan out with Barclays. It wasn't the easiest. It did take us a couple of weeks to actually get it, but eventually we were able to tweak and sort cash flow predictions out and all the rest of it. and then, you know, I would like to sort of just make some comments on the I almost said Shepway, sorry, Catherine, Folkestone and Hythe District Council. They have been one of the most proactive councils when it comes to trying to listen to business, and during the lockdown, supporting a lot of the local businesses with various webinars that have gone on, and talking about other initiatives, and in particular with the discretionary grant, as Catherine mentioned, they have opened it up and been really proactive to help out. And, you know, we were one of the benefactors of that discretionary grant, whereas so many of the other councils across the country haven't done that at all. I was involved in a webinar with Visit Kent and UK Hospitality recently, and I believe we're talking literally 2 or 3 local authorities across the whole country, that's it, have actually extended the discretionary grant to hospitality businesses over 51,000 rateable value. So really grateful and thankful that the local council in Folkestone and Hythe have actually sort of been supportive there. But there are some serious concerns going forward now. There are big redundancies in our district, Folkestone and Hythe, and the rest of East Kent, not just Folkestone and Hythe. Despite reopening on the 4th of July, everybody thought there was going to be a big staycation boom, and that everyone was going to be visiting all the local pubs and restaurants on a regular basis and spending money. The reality is, as I think many of you know, maybe also because the weather hasn't been the best, is that the majority of places haven't seen that boom. Where you've seen an uptake has been predominantly on places that have had outdoor space, and where they've got, for example, a sense of outdoor space, like, for example, breaks in, you know, lodges, cabins, glamping, caravans, self-catering units, those sorts of places. Your more traditional hotels, guest houses, B&Bs and what have you, we haven't seen that uptake. So July has been terrible for us. It really hasn't been good across the board. Even the coastal locations and city centre locations have suffered even worse. Talking to colleagues in London and other, you know, I know with Canterbury, where I've got a hotel as well, it's terrible. We're working, I mean, some places in London are working on less than 5% occupancy, which isn't sustainable. And going forward, it's a real concern. But, you know, Matt mentioned about the groups. It's a really good point. We're one of those hotels that does rely on the travel trade, which is the coaches that bring people down, especially in the winter. And then you've got some hotels that rely on the travel trade all year round. You know, you all know the Bursting, you all know a few of the other coach party hotels across the district. And, you know, the Bursting has had to lay off nearly 50% of their workforce, which is around 100 people recently. So that's the sort of impact it's going to have. We've had to lay off some people as well. We rely on that business in the winter, and they've all just cancelled because they're getting down to us. So yeah, real concern going forward. What are we going to do after the summer? There are some positives. You know, things are picking up now in August. The weather's a bit better, summer holidays, everybody else is full. The quarantine with the likes of Spain and other countries potentially is meaning some people that were going to go abroad might actually stay now. So we may get the leftover demand now for August and actually do a bit of business and hopefully even try and break even and recover some of the losses that we've accumulated to date. But unfortunately, there really is still a concern after the summer, we get into the autumn and winter as to what's going to happen if there isn't continued support from the government. So a real mixed bag of some good news stories, but also some serious concerns. So we'll have to watch the space and see how we get on.
Okay, Daniel, it's very challenging for you in particular, and we do hope that things will get sorted. Hopefully things will improve. Let's just hope we don't get this second spike or local scenarios, but it's a case of preparing. So good luck to you, and good luck to most of you, because you need that extra bit of support, as it were. But let's just hope things will get on well. And like Neil says, with some of the seminars or webinars I've been involved in, the main thing is if you're safe and well, then, there are some even more horror stories out there without dwelling on it. But let's hope that things will pick up. But nevertheless, that the chamber is there. If you come across businesses, then you can signpost them to the helpline, or indeed, if they're in this area, Folkestone and Hythe District have got some good mechanisms in place for that. I'm going to have to draw to a close now. Our next meeting rather is scheduled for the 28th of October. I know that seems a long way away, but we'll go for a Zoom meeting for now, unless you hear anything otherwise. I've just had the information through from Julia, so that's good, and we'll share that as well with the minutes when they become available. Just want to say thanks for attending today. Usual, stay safe, but honestly, keep your chin up. I'm sure things will sort themselves out. There is light at the end of the tunnel, but at least we're making way. That's what it's all about. But yeah, I wish you well. Stay safe, and I'll catch up with you soon.
Thanks, Ray.
Take care.
Thank you, Ray.
Thanks, everyone.